Adam, did you know that comic books were one of the most popular package gifts during World War II?
No.
Apparently, it was because they were small in size and they were easily folded or rolled to fit into care packages. And they were just 10 cents, and they made apparently the perfect, cheap, read it once and pass it along kind of gift. Do you read comics by chance?
I mean that makes sense. They're really, small and flat, can be rolled up and shipped quite easily. But no, I maybe read a comic book once in my life. Although I did enjoy reading like the comic strips in the newspaper when I was
Right. Oh,
younger.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But
I can
no,
buy that.
never a comic book. Mm-mm.
Yeah, I
You?
think I passed right by comic book shelves. I'm not gonna lie. Not really
No,
my
no
cup of tea.
manga, no manga.
The what now? What? I I like am like you. Back when newspapers existed, when they were still printed, I would actually read the comic strips in the newspaper just for fun. But to tell you the truth, I've never really picked up a traditional kind of comic book. But apparently, World War II troops were so in love with comic books, they carried on that tradition for love of comic books into their civilian lives. And from then on, the lion's share of comic books marketplaces were featured for the more mature themes that the military member liked, like crime, which I happen to be a fan of true crime, so maybe I'm missing out something here. Supernatural horror and war, all the things that the returning veterans were really into. So, also, fun fact, Adam, Stan Lee, the famous comic book author, was a World War II veteran. He served as a member of the Signal Corps. He repaired telephone poles, believe it or not, and other communications equipment, and later transferred to the training film division, which that is where combat photographers spawned from. If you didn't know, a little history there.
Mm.
So I have a personal tie to that. And that's where he worked writing manuals, training films, slogans, and the occasional cartoon. So,
Oh, that's really cool. No, I didn't know that. I mean, I am familiar with Stan Lee, and then obviously the comic books gave way to the superhero, comic movies, which, how can you not be familiar with those? So in that capacity, thank you, comic books. Thank you, Stan Lee, for making such an incredibly engaging, content. But no, I didn't know that. It's pretty cool.
one little less fun factoid for you is that he was also a member of the Hollywood Post 43. So, shout out to you guys out at Post 43.
Shout out Post 43.
Let's get this show started.
This is the Tango Alpha Lima podcast.
They call me crazy cause I'm facing all my giants. They try to scare me into thinking I can fight it. They tell me I should never even think of trying. But that's just me, I'm gonna live out in defiance.
Welcome, Alphas. Thanks for joining us. Though our co-host Joel Worley is off on a casting call for White Men Can't Jump Part 2, Adam and I will do our best to hold the fort down. And we've got a great show for you today. We're going to be joined by comic writer and illustrator Stephen Russell, who served in the Army as an infantryman for a decade and even served with me at the Battle of Baqubah in 2007. But before we chat with him, Adam, have you got some homework for our alphas?
That's right, I do, but it's an assignment I think that they'll actually want to take on, Stacy. So the Eiteljorg Museum in Indianapolis recently opened a temporary exhibit from the Smithsonian called Why We Serve, which focuses on integral contributions of Native Americans who have served and why they chose to serve. The American Legion is a sponsor of this exhibit, and some of our member stories are included in the exhibit. They're still accepting stories for inclusion from all veterans, not just Native Americans. And we'll include a link in the show notes where you can go for instructions on creating and submitting your video. The museum is offering free entry to the exhibit for any veteran or service member. So if you're coming to Indianapolis for spring NEC meetings next week, or later in the month for any of the events in the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, or anyone visiting Central Indiana for any reason at all this summer, it's worth planning some extra time to check out this exhibit. The exhibit runs through August 1st. So I guess the question here is, why is it important for veterans to tell their personal stories? And what do you say to someone who thinks their story is insignificant when compared to others? That's a good question, Stacy. What do you think?
I don't think, as minor as someone maybe attributes their story, there's nothing insignificant about it. It's funny how much we outsiders like look at other people's experiences and think, man, I've never done anything like that. But then, others reflect on our own stories and they think the same thing. So yeah, no story is insignificant.
I agree with that 100%. I would say that collectively we are our experiences. Our experiences become us, and we can reflect on that and think about it. And then as we tell those, they become our stories. And a lot in the veteran mental health space, there's this thing about, kind of relative to this comparative trauma. So your trauma is more than mine. I devalue what I went through because you went through something more extreme. No. Like we all have our personal experiences, and they're all meaning and valuable. So you should definitely share your story.
Agreed. Okay, Alpha, stick around. We'll be right back with Stephen Russell right after the break.
Talking about suicide is hard, but the American Legion has joined forces with Columbia University to develop training for those who want to learn more about interacting and responding to veterans who may be in crisis. American Legion Be the One training. In the 90-minute class, you'll learn to understand the types of suicidal ideation and 4 behaviors that indicate imminent risk, how to use the Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale to determine at-risk individuals, how to identify risk factors and warning signs, and how to communicate effectively with individuals who may be at risk of hurting themselves. Online and in-person sessions are available. Visit betheone.org/training to find a session. Learn the skills that'll give you the confidence to talk about suicide and be the one to save just one veteran.
Today, we're joined by comic book creator Stephen Russell, who shares an account of his experiences as a soldier and the untold stories of his infantry brothers through a comic book titled Troublemakers, the greatest dog and pony show in Iraq. It's a memoir of sorts that explores the complex emotions, moral dilemmas, and sacrifices soldiers face while serving on the front lines. But I'll let Stephen talk about that. Stephen, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks, Stacy. I'm glad I could be here. And yeah, the comic book is Tales of Nihilism, and then I'm writing a memoir about my deployment to Baqubah, Iraq, and that one's titled Troublemakers, the greatest dog and pony show in Iraq.
Oh, awesome. Well, Stephen, welcome to the show. Kind of narrowing in on the comic book side of the house first, as a comic book creator, I assume that you probably wear many hats to be able to create a comic book, which may include like the story, narrative, the artwork, publishing, marketing, and I'm sure about 16 or 17 other hats that I'm not tracking. So a lot of things to be able to bring your idea from idea into reality. I wanted to start with maybe a little bit about your creative process that you've cultivated over your, I'm assuming, like military career, before military career, into what you do now after the military. And like that creative process, how has your military experiences influenced that over time?
Yeah. So with the comic, the creative side of the house, there's a very different process going through that, storyboarding, outlining, and if I had to link it back to anything that I did in the military, it's almost like planning for an op order. You've got to sit here and figure out deadlines, figure out, okay, what has to come first. And some of that is through experience and messing it up, and then, going back and fixing things. But it's interesting because that's a lot more structured on the creative part. You think, with the creativeness, you're just out there doing whatever, but no, it's really like, okay, I need to have a beginning, middle, and end. Here's the plot, here's the conflict, and then from there, how much time do I have to, draw and set up 22 pages? And I'm also working with a script writer. So, that project management kind of comes into play there. On the business side of the house, that's more, fluctuation, and, you're trying to figure out how you can promote it, sell it. And like you said, wearing all those different hats. And it's kind of, the military kind of helps in that area, because you learn to compartmentalize very well. So it's almost like when, I'm in my creative sessions, I'm there, I'm focused doing that. And then when it's time to look at, doing the business side of the house, I like take that hat off, put the other hat off, and then I'm like in that mode.
That's really interesting. And I know that you're also working on your memoir, and you and I served together in Baqubah, Iraq at the same time, but I'm not 100% sure if we ever did any operations at the same time or together. But that's neither here nor there. But I was researching your work, and so I was paying particularly close attention to the memoir Troublemaker, and I read it's meant to challenge Americans to think about their role in military conflicts and how war shapes our lives. Can you give us a little rundown about Troublemaker, elaborate on that purpose of the work, and what you say is the call to action? Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's been quite some time, well over 15 years since, that period with the war in Iraq, the surge and all of that. And I think that, American culture and society, we haven't really taken any sort of like reflective look at what occurred during that time, and what was going on, and what those like second and third order effects of this like society that we live in today. And, how that even goes further into, how we're seen across the world and how we interact, globally as well. So and then, only 1% of the US population even served in Iraq. So it's even more of like a niche group of people who were involved, and you have so many different viewpoints, you have so many different ideas that, are popping up, that I think it was important that I wrote this memoir, not just to tell me and my brother's story, but to also give people a framework of somebody who at the time, I was a private and moved up to specialist. So I wasn't a captain. I wasn't like super cool special forces. This is, your average soldier's perspective of what's going on during that time. And the call to action is to try to have more people involved in seeing these perspectives and understanding, kind of like how we can reflect on that time period, and maybe have a better, strategy for things going forward when we talk about these things.
Do you mind if I have a follow-up question here? I'm curious what your perspectives are, having kind of worked through the memoir, the messages that you want to share. Is there anything during that process that you found illuminating within yourself, or how you looked at that experience now that you've had some distance between you and that time frame?
Yeah, it's basically been a 15-year process to write this memoir, and to try to hone in on some sort of, idea of what I want to say about the deployment, and how I want to tell that story. There's a lot of news out there. There's a lot of, like military history. There's things that people can research if you're out there just looking for the most accurate, detailed, historical account of things that happen, that are very, that don't provide any sort of nuance, don't provide any sort of like human character to the environment and things that are going on. So, over these 15 years, it was very cathartic to write these things out, to have to kind of like relive these experiences and talk to people. And then there were periods of time where I would put the work down, and I would almost be afraid to go back to it, because I was like, well, what if what I have to say, isn't accepted by, other people, or what if even, my brothers who served with me, they don't accept what I have to say. And, it took some time, but after talking to a lot of fellow vets who served with me, eventually they were like, they compelled me, and they said, the story is important. And a lot of us, we have, PTSD and all these issues and troubles expressing ourselves and talking to people about this. So if this is something that you're comfortable with, like, you should be the person to tell the story, like, get it out there.
So thanks for that, Stephen. Yeah, just listening in, I'm hearing a few different things, and that's, kind of like looking at the macro lens, of the Iraq War. And it's like, what went on there, and what did we think we were going over there to do, and then what happened, right? And then you were there
Yeah.
during the surge for a specific deployment. So then you have, we were in Iraq specifically for several years, over a decade, not quite 20 years like Afghanistan. I myself was there from 2010, to 11 as a Apache helicopter pilot. I did some of my platoon leader time and battle, captain time there. The unit that I was in was there for the surge and provided, direct support for the Battle of Baqubah in Iraq. And so there's also like the more granular, like what you experienced like during your rotation, during your deployment, during your time over there.
Mhm.
And then and that could be like from the collective or from like the battalion or the brigade, or what happened during that year time frame. And then there's like, I think, more granularly, like the individual's perspective. So as I understand it, this is you going through like, over a course of 15 years, trying to be true to your brothers, to what you experienced over there, what you saw, the good, the bad, and the ugly, which is kind of challenging because it gets into this conversation about patriotism. And if you're telling authentic stories about challenging things, like, are you going against like being like this patriot in some form or fashion? And it's like, well, no,
Yeah.
patriotism is love for your country, and the ability to have this passion and commitment to the country you live in and serve. So you can be a patriot, and then war is really hard, and then we have to go over there and we have to do hard things, and that doesn't make us less of a patriot. It's just us expressing the hardships of what we had to do over there in service to our country, being a patriot. Would you feel that that's kind of like a good summary of your process into creating this memoir? And then for you personally, what was the battle like? What was the deployment like that you're communicating, with the reader? What are you trying to, the picture you're painting for them?
Yeah. And, I think you hit the summary, the nail on the head there. You know, the idea too is to kind of not only explain, this crazy event that we all went through, and to kind of like give that perspective to Americans, to let them see, what your average soldier was working through during the surge, and even prior, to that, because from 2003, from the invasion all the way to the surge, was basically just one continuous go, go, go. And, every other day it was something crazy. So it's, you provide that perspective, but you also, like, I want to pair that with the juxtaposition of how veterans are received nowadays and how we're treated by society. And I also have a lot of experience and personal, interactions with, military members in my family, going all the way back to World War II. and hearing about how they came back. You know, my father, he was in Vietnam, and he was an Air Force guy, but you know, once he came back, you have this idea of like all these soldiers are receiving a lot of like backlash from American culture and society. But on the other side, with like the economic side of the house, they're readily pulled into the workforce. They're readily, you know, stabilized, and they're given this like, you know, kind of like floor that they can work off of and grow and, you know, help themselves. Whereas we kind of have an opposite now of, you know, you come back from these deployments, and throughout the ages, you're watching, you're like, okay, they've got NFL flyovers, armies doing their band at the Super Bowl. Everybody's got a yellow ribbon on their car. As soon as you say, you know, I served in the military, it's thank you for your service. But on the other side, it's like, well, okay, can I get out of the military and do the same job that I did in the military with the same pay, same style benefits, and take care of myself? And it's like, nope, that's the part where, you know, you've got to start back at the bottom. And so I feel like if I give people a perspective of like literally the craziness that soldiers had to go through during this time, maybe there will be more level of respect and understanding, you know, in that area.
Yeah, I think what you're sharing is quite complex, as I'm sure actually writing this memoir was for you. My question is, you know, creating this, you said it was cathartic. I know that I put together a book of pictures. I was a combat photographer during the Battle of Baqubah, and it took me several years to even go back into my archives because every picture had an emotion tied to it. And I
Yeah.
imagine that's not different for you as you're reliving some of these memories. It had to be in some ways re-traumatizing. I'm only projecting what I felt during my own experience in that. I'm curious if it was the same for you, but if it was, what did you do to get through that process when having to sort of mentally relive those experiences?
Well, you know, there's definitely a lot of trauma tied to it. You know, personally, in my company alone, we lost 12 guys, and you know, at least twice of that were, you know, injured to the point that, you know, they had to leave the battle space. So you know, it's that part is like traumatic, and there's this, you know, idea that it's tough to revisit. I actually found that going back though, it was easy for me because that's kind of those points where I get real technical about this happened at this point, and this is, you know, what is going on, and here's the headspace that I'm in during that time. The kind of catharsis and realization where, you know, I almost got in a depressive state was reliving the experiences and kind of having this feeling that had been the most free that I had ever been in my life. You know, it was this time period that was, even though there's crazy hectic things going on, it's this, you know, beautiful society that you're living in, where you wake up, you do a job every day, you're free from like the societal, you know, bonds that we all have. You don't have to worry about your rent payment. You don't have to worry about like, oh, we got to go, you know, do this appointment and do that, and taxes, and you know, all of that is, you know, thrown to the wayside, and you're just existing in the moment every single day, and you're having these experiences, and some of them are going to be the most deep interpersonal experiences that you have with another human being ever, you know, and that goes beyond your spouse, children, family, and you connect with people on a deep level there. And you know, that's why we call them our brothers and sisters, because you know, you build those bonds and stuff. So part of that was kind of like a bittersweet, you know, trying to move through that and just realize like, wow, like that was a period in time that I'll never be able to relive that or get that back.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I can relate a lot to what you're saying, especially, there's times, and it's hard for people that haven't, deployed or been to combat to understand that sometimes life is like easiest and most simple, like deployed and in
Yeah.
combat. And I know that was the case, for me in a lot of regards. For I just had one combat tour, and so 1 year, and in many regards it was the hardest year of my life. In a lot of regards it was the easiest, and part of that was yeah, because of the things that you're talking about, right? Everything that pulls on you back home on a daily basis is reduced down to just, there's a handful of things, very structured. For me, it was rinse, lather, and repeat. Wake up, get breakfast, go get your O&I brief, go down, pre-flight the aircraft, get in the aircraft, fly 6 to 8 hours, go debrief, try and get a workout in, eat some more food, and then go watch a movie for a little bit, and try to get your 8 hours of sleep so you could be rested, and then do it again the next day. But then what you're talking about is based off the time that we served, and what was going on during your deployment. You're quite possibly exposed to some of the hardest things um, that you'll ever experience. And
Yeah.
that was certainly the case in Baqubah during the surge, which for me, my experience with the surge was flight school, and we kept, I'd be interested to hear a little bit more about your perspective as that E1, E4, and how that related into maybe some of the things that you saw and some of the things you heard from your colleagues going back and interviewing them. But for me, the surge was, hey, we're plussing up 100,000 troops in Iraq, and so therefore we need more pilots, and we're gonna push more people through flight school, but we're not
Yeah.
gonna start building more aircraft, and we're not going to hire more instructor pilots. So we're limited by our aircraft and our instructor pilots. So we had like 4,000 warrant officers and like 2,000 commissioned officers in Fort Rucker, Alabama, in some varying stage of backlog to be able to go into the flight school pipeline, to be able to produce pilots, to go and meet the demands of what we were ramping up to for those operations over there. So what was it like going back and talking, to those that were in your unit, or those that you had a chance to kind of validate, the battle and the experiences and what they saw? What did you learn from having those conversations?
Yeah. The first thing that you learn is something that you also learn in like psychology 101, is that eyewitness key testimony is like some of the worst testimony available. Everyone sees something, and everyone sees something different, and you can ask 12 people about one incident, you'll get 12 complete different answers. And so what I tried to do was, when the deployment was over, one of the first things I did was sit down and write everything that I could remember about the deployment, things that just stuck out in my mind. I didn't write like 100 pages or anything. I was just like going over probably like a full weekend, and anytime I would remember something, I'm like, okay, write that down. Okay, write that down. And so I at least had that frame of reference to begin with. And then when I'm having these conversations later, I'm having my memories, and I'm listening to other people, and I'm picking up, and I'm like, okay, if I can hear this from, two other guys, and I have the same or very similar, experience or memory, I can at least trust that, and like, okay, that's something that it's also not just trustworthy, it's something that sticks out to all of us as important. And so I need to include this in the story, because this seems, important to our story to tell.
Not to put you on the spot or anything, Stephen, but would you be open to sharing a little snippet from your memoir, or perhaps something that you feel is maybe the most impactful from putting it together?
Oh, shoot. There's I don't have the book, in front of me. But yeah, I mean, I'd have to say starting off at the cover, with the title and all that, the name Troublemakers, that was our platoon name. So, we were called Troublemakers because everyone in our platoon had at least one Article 15. I had two, at the time. And so this is kind of like building the character of, how this book is going to start and what kind of individuals, you're getting a rough and gruff type of crowd. So there are a lot of interesting and fancy, crazy things that occur in the book, and how we're dealing with all of that. At this time, I can't think of anything that just like shoots out. I'm sorry.
No, don't apologize. And is your memoir really based solely at like FOB Warhorse, or are you out at a combat outpost, or is it from like the time you left the United States through your combat deployment?
Yeah, so I started at the beginning of my military career in 2004, and I try to make quick work of basic training, and even my first duty station, which was Korea, and that's where I got my first Article 15. And if anything, that now that you're reminding me, that's one of the stories that does stick out, because when I came into Korea and E6 was there giving us our brief about the country, they were like, how many of you here are E5 and want to get your E6? And all the sergeants raised their hands. And then they said, okay, I'm going to give you the secret. The fastest way to leave Korea E6 is to come here E7. And it was very, very true. That was such a different experience, and just on top of all the general military, things that you have to deal with, also dealing with, Korea. I was there right off the bat. There was a riot that occurred in there on Camp Red Cloud that I was a part of, and having to do force comm, and then going up to the DMZ and all these other crazy things. So it was just like, already my military career was starting off very chaotic and kind of like out of control. And once I came over to Fort Hood after that, that's where the bulk of the book picks up. And that's a lot of where I am feeling defeated. I'm like in this bad headspace, and not really, you figure I'm 19 years old at the time. I'm not really too mature and grown up. And a lot of going into Iraq was, helping me with that, and maturing me and giving me these different perspectives and point of view. And, to the question of like, where were we? We were stationed at FOB Warhorse, but we didn't spend much time there. So we were out at, they eventually named it Cop Adam, but, we called it Bone Disneyland. And that was the joke. You had all the different stations at Disneyland. The radio, talk area was called the Epcot Center. There was an OP that was a tower that spewed sewage all the time, and we called that Splash Mountain. So, this is the kind of like culture that we built, and we kind of realized like there were so many things out of our control that you had to have a sense of humor to get through these kind of things. And so we were out at Bone Disneyland, and we would operate in between Baqubah and Tahrir, and we lived amongst the people. We didn't have shelter from, eventually they set up like HESCOs and stuff, but we didn't have like a gate. We didn't have all these like things that you have on a FOB, and we had to you had to really get to know the local populace and to learn like the ebbs and flows of like what was going on a daily basis, so that you could see, mark differences that are occurring. Like, hey, this street is normally like really filled. There's kids playing all the time, and all of a sudden you turn down the street and no one's down there. And then that's like, okay, what's going on? And all those kind of things. But it also gave you like a cultural perspective from the people. And then you're going through and talking to them, and you're having those interactions. And it's something that I don't really hear from a lot of people who deployed prior and would just stay on the FOB and go out and run missions, and then afterwards, same kind of deal. They're doing like security and kind of jobs on the FOB, and they'll go out and do random missions and then come back out. They really didn't get that immersive experience.
So the Disneyland reference, is that have anything to tie in the Dog and Pony show, or where does that tie in?
Yeah. I was afraid to put, Bone Disneyland as the title, because that's kind of like, well, I definitely don't want Mickey Mouse coming after me. But I do, identify in the book that, that's what we called it, was Bone Disney. And there was also this idea of, you have to do all these things for the Dog and Pony show. And we all know that term in the military. And we had to live this chaotic life. We had to struggle every day for every inch that we got. And, we even had to fight for the combat outpost that we had. And so when we took that and we have everything and we're establishing this AO and, trying to make all these decisions, it was like halfway through the deployment, the big army came by and they were like, oh, no. We see you guys living out here like savages, and, you don't have a company commander anymore. You're missing lieutenants and all this. We have to tidy this up. And even General Petraeus came out and made like a big show and all this other stuff. So, that's what it turned into, was the Dog and Pony show.
Wow. What about you, Adam? Have you ever had an experience with Dog and Pony shows up at the helicopter units?
I mean, I think, from my perspective, there's the folks that are closest to the front lines, and, there's the troops that are, doing the work day in and day out. And then as you move through the echelons, of the military, the work changes and it becomes different. And so, when those higher up officers and generals that are leading our organizations, come down, you have to go through some pomp and ceremony sometimes to be able to make sure that, you can communicate what it is that you're doing for the short, very brief amount of time. And so, especially at the lower enlisted levels, it can feel very much, like a Dog and Pony show. But no officer or no plans, officers, sitting up there planning, the general to come by and being like, all right, this is the Dog and Pony show mission that we're going to do. It's all for seemingly, a reason, to support something, or to be able to bring that officer, down there and interact with, those that don't have the opportunity. And I think that that's a pretty cool thing that General Petraeus came down there to your post, because, I served in the same time as you, and I never once, got to be in a forum, with him. So that's pretty remarkable from
I actually got attacked by his entourage. So that was, part of it too. He came in with this nice motor pool and his motorcade, and they were checking out the cop and seeing what we had done with it. And I'm sitting there at my OP, General, I'm Private Russell, just gotten off doing my my second deal of extra duty, for my second Article 15, and I'm feeling pretty down. And he came up to my my OP. He's looking around, and then he's got his soft cap on, and I get nervous, so I start explaining, my OP. I'm like, sir, here's my range card. Here's, our weapon system. That building over there, we get shot at like every day from that building. And he takes his head and he sticks it underneath my blast shield where my weapon is, and looks right where I pointed. And I see it just flashes in my head like, oh God, General Petraeus, he's going to get shot. And so I grab him and I ripped him back from my weapon system and under the blast shield. And I was like, sir, you don't have a hardcover on. And his whole entourage got mad at me, and they pulled me down to the side and everything. And he's like, stop. And then, when he pushed through him, he's shaking my hand and he gave me a coin, and then he was like, just remember, you can always check up. So it's crazy.
Pretty cool. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think I probably would have reacted the same way in that scenario. Yeah. I'm surprised you didn't get a third
I
article
was in
15
total
though.
fear. Yeah, I know. And my company commander came up. He's like, "What did you do, Russell?" I was like, "I don't know, sir, but I got a coin."
I gave the
Like,
general a nuggie,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Well, I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about your comic book. I know that Adam touched on that when we first started our conversation. I think we need to kind of circle back on it. I'm full disclosure, not a comic book person. I obviously know the big hits like Superman, Spider-Man, and stuff like that. But what is Tales of Nihilism? What's the premise? Can you give us a rundown?
Absolutely. So Tales of Nihilism is kind of like the studio for the artistic content that we put out. And we're trying to run like an anthology series where we'll have a main series comic, and then we'll have short stories that may offshoot from that, or just be random short stories. And then we'll also include comic strips, almost like Sunday funny, type thing. But the idea is to reach who you're talking about, you yourself, where we want to tell stories that relate to a more general audience. People, it's hard for people to relate to Superman or Batman, or there's a million stories out there that are sci-fi and high fantasy and things like that. There's not really much of the medium that's geared towards your average person and the stories that we go through every day. And that's where I wanted to take this and use that medium to tell those stories. So like our first main series issue, it's called The Ballad of Philip Kirshner, but the premise of the whole story is it's a normal average man, and he lives in a world full of superheroes and villains, but it details his life and how hard it would be to struggle and actually live in that society.
Okay. Yeah, it's very interesting. And so do you have the opportunity to I assume as, doing this, for your career, and you have to strike that balance between, creating content that's inspired, by you and your lived experiences to what is the consumer going to actually consume. And so there's like that creative balance that happens there. And then, there's the consumer itself of your material. Do you have the opportunity to interact with and engage with folks that engage with your either the comic books and the memoir is not yet out, right? If I understand that correctly.
The memoir's on pre-order, but it's supposed to be officially dropping at the end of this month.
Okay, so as far as like engaging, with your audience, that would probably be more directed towards, the comic book side. But what has that been like? Do you engage with them on events, venues, digital forum, and what's the feedback been?
Yeah, so we do the whole social media and all that, and the publishing, we publish digitally on Global Comics, and that's quickly becoming the new main forum to publish webcomics. Amazon had like their own deal, but they kind of like shut down that whole section of their company. So people kind of flooded away from that, and even big names like Image Comics and the Archies and those kind of people, they gravitated over to Global Comics. And so it gives you almost like a space not only to create and publish these comics, but you also get to, like you say, interact with people who follow you. You can put out information, you can ask them how they feel about things. It allows them to comment, react, to even individual pages in the comic. So that part's good, but our favorite thing is we went to a comic convention, Plastic City Comic Con, last year, and that's where we got a lot of really good feedback on people reading the first issue and saying like, oh my god, I haven't read anything like this before. And like the best piece of feedback I got was a guy who literally said that he was like, I can't relate to Superman or Spider-Man, but I can relate to what your character, like I've been through that and I feel what he's going through. I was just like, that's, that's what we're going for. And so we're going to be making a reappearance at that convention this year. And then we got sponsored to go out to Veteran Comic-Con in November this year as well.
Awesome.
pretty
That's
cool.
outstanding. Yeah.
Yeah. Are you doing the words and the art or just the words? Like, what's your role in it?
So I'm the artist, and then I do like the story concept, and I work with the script writer to refine my ideas and pull those down.
Right. Okay. And where did you learn how to draw? Were you sketching before the military, during your service? Like, how did that develop?
Absolutely. I've always been, a doodler, if you will, like just, sketching and drawing and all of that. And I think I want to say I was about like 8 years old when I went to the library and I picked up Stan Lee's How to Draw a Comic book. And I just took that book and followed every piece, every instruction and every page, did all the practical things, but going out buying like a little old art style ink, with the pen nibs and all that. And it carried over into the military, but not, in a professional sense. I was definitely somebody who people could go to. They're like, hey, can we draw up like a company coin? Or, hey, can we, do this or that? And I'm drawing, like, I drew like a combat monkey on my gunner shield in Iraq and stuff. So I had that, but there was no professionalism or push into it. It just always seemed like this is just a part of you that you exist with. And it wasn't until I got out where I was like, this is something that I want to invest in. I want to reconnect with this part of my life. And I think I have a lot that I could express in story form. And so let me see about, looking back into comics and investing into that.
Oh, thanks for that, Stephen. Well, we really appreciate the time that you've spent with us today. Before we sign off, is there anything else that you want to share with our alphas that we didn't have a chance to discuss? And we're going to have all your social connections and everything in our show notes.
Yeah, definitely check us out on Global Comics and Blue Ear Books, who's publishing the memoir. But one of the things that we offer through our studio is we offer advertising space in our comic books. So if you're, a small business, especially a veteran-owned business, it's a great way for you to market and reach an audience with that more personal connection. Because I'm going out with these comics and your ads in there, and we get to have that interpersonal, connection.
Awesome. Well, thanks for that, Stephen. Thank you so much for visiting us today. Alpha, stick around for some scuttlebutt after the break.
The American Legion is raising awareness about PTSD and veteran suicide by offering hope, camaraderie, and support.
Be the one to help end veteran suicide.
Be the one to save one veteran.
Be the one to ask a veteran in your life how they're doing.
Be the one to reach out when a veteran is struggling.
Go to betheone.org and help the American Legion end veteran suicide.
Will you be the one?
Okay, Alphas, we hope you had a great break. Now it's time for some scuttlebutt.
Yeah. According to Stars and Stripes, due to a lack of civilian contract airliners that could bring them to the island for the ceremony, none of the few surviving American veterans who fought on Iwo Jima during World War II traveled to the remote island in March to commemorate the 79th anniversary of the 36-day battle. Last year, several of the remaining U.S. veterans made the journey. The 79th Reunion of Honor featured U.S. Marine and Japanese soldiers marching side by side in a ceremony to honor troops from both nations who fought with valor on Iwo Jima. Quote, "This ceremony is a solemn reminder of the price of freedom and the cost of peace," said Lieutenant General Roger Turner, MEF commander. I wonder what MEF stands for. I'll have to look that up later. Or alphas can write in and tell me what it means. But anyway, he said that while addressing nearly 200 people gathered to take part in the 2024 commemoration. There are no surviving Japanese veterans from the Battle of Iwo Jima. Members of Japanese families who lost loved ones on Iwo Jima joined the family members of U.S. Marine veterans who witnessed the ceremony. So what does it mean that no more veterans are attending these ceremonies? I think probably because most of them are sadly dying off. But Adam, I'm curious, why do you think that there aren't any more people really attending them?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and I think I kind of default into the importance of ceremony. And so why are these ceremonies important in general? Why is ceremony important? And I think it's a very human thing to bring people together to be able to share and reflect in something that happened. So, the fact that folks aren't coming to these, I mean, I think it's more or less a byproduct, at least for those that were there, like you were saying, as their age and no longer having the numbers that we once did. I think that's probably true for other battles throughout history as well. I mean, some of the more notable ones, but throughout the breadth and depth, of the world, people aren't showing up for those memorials because so much time, has passed and elapsed. So I think that's probably what we're seeing, but it doesn't make it any less important. And still finding those opportunities when and where it makes sense to come together in fellowship and remembrance is, I think, very important.
Yeah, and I think that being one of the core values for the American Legion, which is honor and remembrance, it makes sense that we continue to do that within our posts. And I wonder, for all those who fought on Iwo Jima and take the time to have these ceremonies every year, I wonder if it's a matter of maybe restructuring what that ceremony looks like. Because the World War II veterans are sadly not going to be with us much longer. And so what does that ceremony look like in the years ahead, knowing that there were none of them there this year? So that obviously is, going to change the roadmap moving forward. But that also makes me wonder, like, Adam, you and I are both veterans of the Iraq War, and, we're coming into 20-year anniversaries now. So we're going to be those folks in just a couple of decades, and our wonderful Korean War veterans are now into that same situation. Our Vietnam veterans will be. And so, yeah, just something for y'all alphas to ponder. What do you guys think? Dear alphas, write us. Let us know what you think about honor and remembrance, the core value of the American Legion, and how ceremonies will continue moving forward.
According to a Military Times article in April, VA officials say they have implanted more than 1 million orthopedic devices, such as those used in hip or shoulder reconstruction between 2019 and 2023. Quite a milestone, if you ask me. However, investigators from the Government Accountability Office warn that despite this widespread use of non-biological implantable devices among VA patients, the department lacks an effective tracking system for many of the devices, leading to a major health and safety concern. The Veteran Health Administration has not fully assessed its ability across all specialties to ensure that non-biological implantable medical devices can be effectively tracked back to individual patients, GAO officials wrote in their report. Some VA medical center officials said that they needed to identify patients affected by a safety issue with an orthopedic implantable device. It would require a time-consuming search of the medical records. So in other words, when an implantable orthopedic device is recalled due to manufacturing problems, as was the case 4 times in the last 3 years, the VA has no way of identifying which of their patients may be affected. And those patients could face serious health risks if the failure is not addressed. The GAO report noted that cardiac devices such as pacemakers and implantable defibrillators are meticulously monitored and tracked by VA staffers and not a part of their warning. So that's a little bit of good news. For their part, VA officials have promised to review the issue and address needed changes by March 2025. Wow, Stacey.
Yeah. Yeah.
Concerning.
I mean, I get concerned when I get a recall on my car, and that's not inside my body. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that's definitely please, if you're listening and you've had something put in your body by the VA, you better check it out.
I mean, it's placing a lot of it's placing undue burden on the individual because I mean, you know what you had, replaced. Hopefully you do. And you just have to stay on top of it to be in communication with your provider to see if something was indeed recalled that's in alignment with you. But that's a lot for individuals. So I'm hoping that they can come up with some kind of system to go through the data in the files in a way to take the burden off to some degree, and that they put better systems in place in the future to not run into these things. It sounds like they got it figured out with the pacemakers and the implantable defibrillators. So I feel like there's a Lean Six Sigma process in there that could be replicated, with these other devices. So we'll see. We'll see.
Best of luck, my bionic alphas. Make sure you do your due diligence. Check that out. Hey, while I'm saying check it out, be sure to check out my upcoming television show, After Action Season 2 on PBS. For all of you who are interested, you can stream it online beginning May 6th at pbs.org/show/After Action, or you can visit the website with all the details at afteractionshow.org. You can check your local listings for your local PBS stations for air dates and times, because it's going to vary across the nation. But what's not going to vary is how awesome the show is. So do me a favor, alphas, show you love, tune in, and then, hey, follow us on social media, engage in the conversations, and maybe even consider hosting a panel discussion at your American Legion posts, because the most important thing we can do is watch this show and keep the conversation going. So that's all I got from you. Adam, what you got?
All right, Alphas. Thanks for listening. You can subscribe to our podcast, our newsletter, or send us mail and guest recommendations at legion.org/Tango Alpha Lima. We'll see you next time.